Hello friends, how are you feeling tonight? I hope your body is relaxed and your mind is calm. If sleep feels far away, this story might help you drift gently into rest. Tonight, we're traveling back to the 12th century, to a world wrapped in candlelight and silence, where stone walls echoed with prayers instead of words, and life moved to the rhythm of bells ringing through the dawn. This is the story of a man who gave up everything, wealth, comfort, and even his own name, to find peace within the sacred walls of Cluny Abbey, one of the greatest monasteries of medieval Europe. But beneath that peace, there were questions, flickers of doubt, secret struggles, and a quiet longing for meaning. And as we follow his footsteps through cold cloisters and hidden libraries, you'll discover not just the life of a monk, but the eternal search for purpose that lives inside us all. So, close your eyes, take a slow breath, and let the echoes of a forgotten age guide you into sleep. If you enjoy stories that bring history to life, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more calm, bedtime journeys through the past. Close your eyes and let us drift backward through the mists of time to a morning long ago when the bells of Cluny Abbey sang softly over the hills of Burgundy. The year is 1208 and the air carries the chill of early spring. The sun has not yet risen, the world is wrapped in twilight, and the monks of Cluny stir within their stone cells like shadows of another age. Inside the abbey, the silence is almost sacred. It is not an empty silence, but one filled with intention, the breathing of faith itself. Every breath, every step, every sound has purpose here. The faint rustle of woolen robes, the whisper of sandals brushing against cold flagstones, the distant toll of the matins bell, all merge into a rhythm older than memory. Brother Guillaume, a young novice barely 20 years of age, awakens to that bell. He has slept little. His dreams have been troubled, visions of a light beyond the cloister walls, of voices that call his name in languages he cannot understand. But when the bell calls, the dream fades, and duty returns like a tide. He rises from his straw mattress, crosses himself, and draws his coarse brown habit tight around his thin shoulders. The chill of the cell bites at his skin. One small candle flickers beside the wooden crucifix above his bed, its flame trembling like his heartbeat. He bows his head and whispers, "Deus, in adiutorium meum intende." "O God, come to my assistance." The words, ancient and familiar, melt into the darkness. Outside, the abbey courtyard lies under a veil of mist. The great stone archway of the cloister opens toward the east, where the faintest grey line hints at dawn. The fountain at the center murmurs softly, its water glimmering in the candlelight from a nearby corridor. Everywhere else, stillness reigns, except for the sound of the bells, solemn and slow, echoing across the valley like the heartbeat of eternity. Brother Guillaume joins the procession of monks moving toward the church. Their faces are calm, expressionless, yet beneath each hood lies a lifetime of thought, repentance, and yearning. They walk in pairs, eyes cast downward, hands folded within their sleeves. No one speaks. Speech at this hour is forbidden, for silence is the language of God. Only the bells are allowed to speak. As Guillaume passes through the arched doorway of the great church, he feels dwarfed by the immensity of the space. Cluny Abbey is not just a building, it is a monument of devotion, carved from the dreams of generations. Its pillars rise like ancient trees. Its vaults stretch heavenward, painted with stars that catch the glimmer of torchlight. The scent of beeswax, stone dust, and old incense fills the air. It smells of centuries, of prayer layered upon prayer, of human longing made eternal. The monks kneel upon the cold floor. The chant begins, slow, measured, pure. Voices blend into one breath, one sound, one soul. Domine, labia, mea, aperis. Lord, open my lips. The Gregorian tones rise and fall like waves against the shore of heaven. Guillaume's voice trembles at first, then steadies, finding harmony with the others. He feels his heart lifted by the vibration of their singing, by the deep pulse of faith that binds them all. For a moment, he forgets his doubts. He is part of something vast and luminous, something far greater than himself. Outside, the sky begins to pale. Through the high stained glass windows, a faint blush of dawn filters in. Soft blues, muted golds, the first whisper of day. Dust motes dance in the light, like souls rising from the earth. The candles flicker, the chant fades into silence. And in that silence, Guillaume feels both peace and ache. Peace for being close to God, ache for all he has left behind. He had not always been destined for this life. He once lived in the small village of Saint-Martin-sur-Saône, the son of a cooper. His hands were meant for wood, not parchment. But when a fever took his mother, and the local priest whispered of calling, of devotion, of the salvation that waits in silence, Guillaume's heart had turned toward the monastery. Now, a year later, he wonders if he made the right choice. He has found discipline, yes, and beauty, but also loneliness. A loneliness so vast, it sometimes feels like another form of prayer. After matins, the monks file silently to the refectory for a cup of watered wine and a piece of coarse bread. They eat in silence, listening to a single reader who recites from the scriptures. Today, it is the Book of Psalms. The voice echoes gently from the vaulted ceiling, every syllable a drop of light. Guillaume chews slowly, tasting the salt of his own tears. He misses the laughter of his sister, the smell of his father's workshop, the chatter of the market. Yet he tells himself that detachment is holy, that to love God fully, one must let go of all else. When the meal is done, they bow, rise, and return to their tasks. Some go to the gardens, others to the kitchens or workshops. Guillaume is assigned to the scriptorium, the sacred room where manuscripts are copied and illuminated. It is his favorite place in the abbey. Rows of desks line the walls, each lit by narrow windows that pour pale light upon stretched parchment. The air smells of ink, wax, and animal hide. Quills scratch rhythmically, like the whisper of wings. It is a place of quiet creation, a bridge between silence and eternity. Guillaume dips his quill, steadying his hand. The Latin words he copies are from St. Augustine. In quietness, the soul finds truth. He writes slowly, reverently, forming each letter as if it were a prayer. At the far end of the room, an older monk named Brother Henri illuminates the margins with intricate vines and tiny gold leaves. The gold catches the light and seems almost alive. Guillaume often wonders if these illuminated letters will outlive them all, carrying fragments of their souls through time. Hours pass unnoticed. The sun climbs higher, spilling light through the cloister arches. Outside, the world stirs, peasants leading oxen through the fields, traders crossing the bridge toward the nearby town. Yet none of that life touches the walls of Cluny. Here, time itself seems to slow, to breathe in rhythm with prayer. The monks move like clockwork, their lives divided by bells: prime, terce, sext, none, vespers, compline. Each sound a reminder that life is fleeting and eternity always near. When evening comes, the air cools again. The monks gather once more in the church for vespers. The candles burn low, their flames trembling like stars caught in wax. Guillaume kneels, weary but calm. His voice joins the chant, deeper now, steadier. He no longer feels the ache of isolation, only the quiet pulse of belonging. Somewhere beyond those stone walls, kings rise and fall, wars rage, empires shift. But here, within the silence of Cluny, the same prayer continues, unchanged for 1,000 years. As the final note fades, night descends fully. Guillaume returns to his cell. He lights his single candle once more, gazes at the crucifix, and whispers his final prayer. Outside, the wind sighs through the cloister arches, and the bells of Compline toll softly across the sleeping valley. He lies down, the straw rustling beneath him, and lets the rhythm of the bells carry him into dreams. Dreams of light, of peace, of a dawn that never ends. And so the day closes, as it has for generations, in silence, in faith, in the eternal heartbeat of Cluny Abbey. The first light of dawn filters through narrow stone windows, soft and cold, turning the abbey walls the color of pale honey. The bells of prime have not yet rung, yet the air hums faintly with the rhythm of anticipation. That gentle, unseen pulse that governs life at Cluny. Every monk feels it, even before the sound reaches their ears. It is the sound of order, of centuries layered upon silence. Brother Guillaume wakes before the bell. He does not know why. Perhaps it is the dream again. A voice, distant and echoing, calling him by name through the mist. Perhaps it is simply the discipline that has taken root in his bones. He sits up, folds his blanket neatly, and kneels at the foot of his bed, whispering his morning prayer. He no longer needs to think about the words. They rise naturally from memory, shaped by endless repetition, worn smooth by devotion. Outside his cell, footsteps pass softly down the corridor. A candle flickers, throwing long shadows along the stone. Somewhere above, a door creaks, and the wind sighs through a broken pane of glass. The world beyond Cluny, of fields, of laughter, of life, feels impossibly far away. Here, time does not move forward. It circles, like the turning of the monastic hours. When the bell of prime finally tolls, Guillaume joins the other monks in the cloister walk. The air is damp, scented faintly of moss and cold stone. They walk in silence, robes brushing the floor, heads bowed. The rhythm of their steps is slow, deliberate, one step for each breath. In that rhythm lies the essence of the rule of Saint Benedict, the sacred text that governs every act, every word, every heartbeat within these walls. The rule is more than law. It is life itself. Written centuries before by Benedict of Nursia, it is both anchor and compass, a guide for living in humility, obedience, and community. Its words are read aloud each morning after prime, and though they have been heard countless times, they never lose their weight. They fall into the air like drops of holy water, soaking into every stone, every soul. Today, the reader is Brother Anselm, an elderly monk with a voice like cracked parchment. He stands at the wooden lectern, candlelight glinting off his silver hair, and begins to read. His voice echoes softly through the chapter house. Listen carefully, my son, to the master's instructions and attend to them with the ear of your heart. Guillaume listens. He always listens. But this morning, something in those words touches him differently. The ear of your heart. He repeats it silently to himself, as though tasting the phrase. What does it mean truly to hear with the heart? To obey not just with body, but with soul? The thought lingers as Anselm continues, his voice weaving through the cold air like smoke. When the reading ends, the abbot, Father Odon, rises from his seat. He is tall, stern, yet his eyes hold a gentleness that comes from long years of prayer. He looks upon the brothers and speaks quietly. The rule, my sons, is not a burden. It is a mirror. Through it, we see ourselves, not as we wish to be, but as God calls us to become. Then he pauses, letting the silence breathe. It is easy to mistake obedience for chains, he continues. But in truth, it is freedom. To obey is to be free from the tyranny of the self. Guillaume lowers his gaze. He understands the words, yet something inside him resists them. Freedom, he thinks, should feel lighter than this. And yet, every day feels heavier, as though each vow adds another stone to the tower of his soul. He wonders if others feel the same, but of course, he cannot ask. Here, questions are not spoken aloud. After the morning reading, the monks disperse to their duties. Guillaume returns to the scriptorium, where he copies the very text that governs his life. His hand is steady, his eyes sharp. Line by line, he traces Benedict's instructions upon the parchment. words of humility, silence, labor, prayer. The black ink gleams wetly before it dries, permanent and final. He often wonders how many monks before him have written these same lines, how many will after he is gone. It feels as though he is but one heartbeat in an endless body, one breath in an eternal prayer. At midday, the bell for sext rings, and the brothers gather once more for prayer. The sunlight now falls full through the cloister arches, painting the stone floor in gold. Dust motes drift lazily in the warm air. The chant begins, soft at first, then growing into a river of sound, flowing seamless, without beginning or end. Guillaume sings with the others, his voice low, his eyes closed. In these moments, he almost feels the peace the rule promises. Almost. After the service, they dine in silence. The meal is simple: lentils, bread, a small piece of cheese. A reader recites from the dialogues of Gregory the Great, telling of Benedict's miracles. When he speaks of the saint, this vision of the world contained in a single ray of light, Guillaume feels his heart stir again. Could faith truly open the eyes of the soul in such a way? Could silence reveal the whole of creation? Later, he helps in the abbey gardens. The soil is damp beneath his fingers, the scent of thyme and rosemary rising into the air. A row of apple trees shivers in the breeze. Here, among the plants, Guillaume finds a kind of wordless prayer. He digs, plants, waters, all without thought. Perhaps this is what Benedict meant by humility, not submission, but harmony. To be so small, so quiet, that the earth itself becomes your companion. As the day fades, the brothers gather again in the chapter house for confession. Each monk kneels before the abbot, admitting his faults, impatience, distraction, pride. Guillaume's turn comes. He kneels, heart pounding, and whispers, "Father, I have allowed my thoughts to wander." The abbot's gaze softens. "Then pray for stillness, my son," he says, "for the heart that wanders can always return." He lifts a hand in blessing. "Go in peace, and let your silence speak more than your words." That night, Guillaume lies awake in his narrow bed. The candle beside him has burned low, the wax pooling like melted gold. The wind sighs through the window slit, carrying with it the faint sound of distant owls. He thinks of the rule again, of obedience, of freedom, of listening with the ear of the heart. He wants to believe that the rule will lead him closer to God, but part of him still longs for something beyond, a kind of light that even prayer cannot name. Outside, the bells of Compline begin to toll. Their sound drifts like waves across the valley, touching every roof, every field, every dream. Guillaume listens, eyes half closed, and feels the weight of centuries pressing gently upon him. Not as a burden, but as an embrace. Perhaps this is what it means to live by the rule. To surrender not out of fear, but out of love. To lose oneself, and in doing so, find eternity. The last bell fades, leaving only silence. The monastery breathes again, steady, eternal. Somewhere deep within that silence, Guillaume's heart begins to answer the call he has been hearing in his dreams. It is faint, uncertain, but it is there. The first whisper of a faith not written in ink or stone, but in the quiet places of the soul. And so ends another day beneath the vaulted heavens of Cluny, where obedience is freedom, silence is song, and every dawn is a step toward the divine. The world was still dark when Brother Anselm A.S. eyes opened to the sound that ruled his existence. The great bronze bell of Cluny Abbey, its deep voice echoing across the cloisters and gardens, rolling through the mist, like the breath of heaven itself. It was the hour of matins, the first of the 7 canonical hours, and though the air bit cold against his skin, there was no hesitation in his movement. In the silence before dawn, obedience was a form of devotion. He rose from his straw-filled mattress, the coarse wool of his habit scratching against his bare arms as he pulled it over his tunic. Around him, the dormitory filled with the hushed rustle of other monks doing the same, each one moving as if guided by an unseen rhythm. No one spoke. Silence was a sacred rule until the morning's work was done. Only the muffled shuffle of sandaled feet and the occasional creak of wood broke the calm. A narrow candle flickered at the end of the hall, throwing trembling shadows against the stone walls. As they filed toward the chapel, Brother Anselm caught a glimpse of the world outside through an arched window. The courtyard, cloaked in fog, the faint outline of the bell tower standing tall like a guardian of faith. He thought of how many generations had walked this same path before him, whispering prayers into the same chill air. Inside the great abbey church, the flickering glow of oil lamps illuminated rows of monks kneeling in perfect order. The air smelled of incense and damp stone, and the only sound was the quiet intonation of the choirmaster as he began the opening verse. Then came the chant, soft, steady, rising and falling like a tide, the Gregorian melody echoing through the vaulted ceiling. Domine, labia mea aperis. The Latin words floated through the air, ancient and eternal. Brother Anselm closed his eyes, his voice merging with the chorus, and for a brief moment he forgot himself entirely. In those notes, time lost meaning. The 12th century and eternity felt one and the same. When matins ended, the monks remained in silent prayer until the faintest blush of dawn touched the high windows. The next service, Lauds, followed soon after, a hymn of praise to greet the morning light. Only after that did they leave the church, stepping into a courtyard washed in pale gold. Birds sang timidly in the nearby orchard, as if offering their own worship. Breakfast was simple: a small loaf of bread, a cup of watered wine, sometimes a handful of dried fruit if the season allowed. The rule of Saint Benedict demanded moderation in all things, and so even hunger became a spiritual lesson. Each monk ate in silence while one brother read aloud from the scriptures, his voice calm and deliberate. To speak during meals was to draw attention away from the word. When the meal ended, the day's labor began. Brother Anselm joined a group of monks assigned to the scriptorium, the great writing room where the Abbey AS manuscripts were copied and illuminated. The room was long and narrow, lined with desks positioned beneath high windows that let in the morning light. The scent of ink, parchment, and candle wax filled the air. He dipped his quill into the ink pot and began to trace delicate black letters across the page. Each stroke was an act of patience, each word a prayer. His fingers ached from hours of careful motion, yet his heart found peace in the repetition. Around him, other scribes worked in silence, the only sounds the scratching of quills and the soft turning of vellum sheets. In the far corner sat Brother Matthew, the illuminator, who added gold leaf and brilliant color to the pages. He ground pigments from minerals, lapis lazuli for blue, malachite for green, cinnabar for red, and mixed them with egg whites or honey to create paint. Watching him work was like seeing creation unfold. A saint's face would emerge from blank parchment, a divine light shining from its painted eyes. Outside, the monastery's life unfolded in rhythm. The lay brothers worked in the gardens, the kitchen, and the barns. The clang of metal echoed from the forge. The soft bleating of sheep drifted from the fields. At regular intervals, the bells rang again, calling the monks to terce, then sext, then none. Each service divided the day into sacred portions, ensuring no hour was wasted. After midday prayers, Brother Anselm took a brief walk in the cloister garden. The square courtyard, framed by carved stone columns, surrounded a patch of herbs and flowers: lavender, rosemary, mint. A small fountain murmured at its center, and the sound of water mingled with the whispers of the wind. Here, even the simplest sight felt holy. A young novice, Brother Peter, approached timidly. He was new to the order, barely 16, his eyes bright with both fear and wonder. They exchanged a silent nod. No words, for the vow of silence still held until after Vespers. But Brother Anselm smiled faintly, remembering when he too had been that uncertain boy. As the afternoon wore on, work shifted from the scriptorium to manual labor. Today, Anselm joined the vineyard workers, pruning the vines before winter. The earth was cold beneath his feet, and his hands soon grew stiff, but there was beauty in the simplicity of it. In tending the soil, he felt he was tending his own soul, pruning away pride, nurturing patience. When the bell tolled for vespers, the monks gathered once again in the chapel. The sun was setting, and shafts of golden light fell through the stained glass, turning the air into hues of crimson and blue. Their voices rose in evening song, weary yet peaceful, like a river flowing toward rest. After a modest supper, they recited Compline, the final prayer of the day. Candles flickered low, and their flames cast halos on the stone floor. Brother Anselm knelt, whispering his final prayer, gratitude for another day of service, for the quiet strength of faith, for the gift of order in a chaotic world. As the lights dimmed and the monks filed silently back to their dormitories, the great abbey fell once more into stillness. Outside, the stars glittered above the darkened cloisters, and the soft murmur of the night wind carried through the ancient halls. Brother Anselm lay down upon his humble bed, eyes closing, knowing that before long, the dawn bell would call again, and when it did, he would rise, just as his brothers had for centuries, to greet the darkness with song. The rhythm of prayer and labor would begin anew, as constant as the turning of the earth beneath the silent watch of God. Dawn returned once more to the Abbey of Cluny, its light soft and pale upon the cloisters, touching the old stones with a kind of sacred warmth. Yet on this morning, the usual calm that blanketed the monastery felt faintly disturbed. From the distant gate came the sound of horses, hooves striking gravel, the jingle of bridles, and the low murmur of men's voices. Brother Anselm, on his way to the morning prayers, paused by the cloister archway. Through the drifting mist, he saw them. Travelers dressed in fine cloaks, trimmed with fur, their boots polished, their banners bearing the sigil of a noble house from Burgundy. 2 guards rode at the front, followed by a priest, and behind them, a young nobleman of perhaps 20 years. His expression carried that strange blend of arrogance and wonder that often marked those of high birth who had seldom seen the simplicity of monastic life. The porter monk bowed deeply as the guests dismounted. The visitors had come seeking hospitality. A rule of Saint Benedict demanded that all who arrived at the monastery be received as if they were Christ himself. No one was ever turned away. Yet within those sacred walls, hospitality was not a matter of luxury. It was humility and service. Brother Anselm joined the other monks in the refectory, where the abbot himself was speaking quietly with the noble visitor. Abbot Bernard was a man of age and wisdom, his face lined by years of prayer and labor. His voice, when he spoke, carried calm authority. "You are welcome within our walls," he said, bowing slightly. "Here, the body is fed lightly, and the soul abundantly." The young nobleman smiled faintly, as though uncertain whether this was a blessing or a warning. "I thank you, Father. I am on pilgrimage to Vézelay, and word of Cluny's greatness has reached every court in Burgundy. I wish to see it with my own eyes, the center of Christendom's devotion." Abbot Bernard inclined his head. "Then you will find no greater devotion than what dwells in silence." The nobleman's gaze drifted across the room, to the monks standing still as statues, to the rough bread laid upon the table, to the simplicity that seemed almost alien to his world of silk and feasts. Brother Anselm saw curiosity in those eyes, but also pity, as if the nobleman could not imagine joy in such austerity. That afternoon, the visitors were given a tour of the abbey. Brother Anselm was assigned to guide them, his quiet manners and learning making him a natural choice. He led them first through the cloisters, where sunlight filtered through arches, and the sound of running water mingled with birdsong. "This place," said Anselm softly, "is built not for glory, but for reflection. Every corner draws the mind upward, toward silence, toward light, toward God." The nobleman nodded, though his eyes seemed to linger more on the grandeur of the architecture than the sanctity of its meaning. They moved through the scriptorium, where scribes bent over their manuscripts, and into the chapel, where a handful of monks chanted the midday office. The visitors listened for a time, their worldly chatter silenced by the solemn rise of the voices. When they emerged again into the daylight, the nobleman turned to Anselm. "Tell me, brother, do you never grow weary of such repetition? Prayer after prayer, hour upon hour, day upon day. Is it not monotonous?" Anselm smiled faintly, his tone gentle. "We are creatures of habit, my lord, yet habit itself becomes the path. The repetition you speak of is not weariness, it is refinement, like polishing a stone until it shines. Our prayers do not change, but we do." The nobleman looked unconvinced. "And what of the world beyond these walls? Do you never miss it? The laughter, the music, the colour of life?" "The world beyond," said Anselm, "is full of colour, yes, but it fades. The beauty here endures." For a long moment, they stood in silence. Then, from the far side of the courtyard, a sudden shout broke the calm. A lay brother calling for help. One of the noble's horses had broken loose, rearing wildly near the garden wall. A few monks rushed to calm it, but before they could reach, the beast knocked over a cart of apples and bolted straight through the herb beds, trampling the careful rows of sage and mint. Brother Anselm ran to help, managing to seize the reins with another monk's aid. The animal's strength was tremendous, its eyes wide with fear. But slowly, by gentle words and firm hands, they subdued it. When at last the danger passed, the nobleman approached, his expression torn between amusement and apology. "My deepest regrets, brother. He is spirited, much like his master, I fear." Anselm bowed his head. "No harm that cannot be repaired. The garden teaches us patience as much as prayer does." Yet beneath the surface, a ripple of unease had stirred. Some of the younger monks had been drawn too near, whispering among themselves, curious about the visitors' fine clothing, their gleaming swords, their talk of distant cities. It was harmless, perhaps, but curiosity, unchecked, was a seed that could grow into longing. That evening, as the monks gathered for Vespers, Abbot Bernard addressed them before prayer. His voice was calm but solemn. "Brothers," he said, "we are called to open our gates to the world, yet not to open our hearts to its temptations. The world beyond Cluny is bright but fleeting. Let not your gaze linger too long upon it. Remember, the rule teaches us that stability is our strength." The words settled over them like a veil. Brother Anselm listened, his heart steady, yet he could not help recalling the young noble's face, the curiosity in his eyes, the restless hunger that no wealth could satisfy. It was a reflection of a truth few dared to speak. Even within the monastery, the soul could be restless, the heart uncertain. Later, after Compline, when silence once again blanketed the abbey, Anselm walked alone through the cloister garden. The moon hung low over the fountain, its reflection trembling in the water. Somewhere in the guest quarters, laughter drifted faintly through an open window, the sound of men who did not live by vows of silence. He paused, listening, and for the briefest moment, something inside him stirred, not envy, but a flicker of remembrance of what life had been before he entered these walls. A voice, a face, long gone. Then he bowed his head, crossing himself, and whispered a prayer against the temptation of memory. When dawn came again, the visitors departed. The nobleman clasped Anselm's hand before leaving. "You have peace here, brother," he said quietly. "I envy it, but I could never live it." Anselm met his gaze. "Peace is not a place, my lord. It is a choice, renewed each morning with the sound of the bell." The young man hesitated, then smiled and turned away. The sound of hooves faded down the road until only the wind remained. Brother Anselm stood watching the empty gate for a long time. Beyond it lay the vast, noisy world, filled with temptation, laughter, suffering, and beauty. Within these walls lay silence and devotion. Both worlds called to the same human heart, and he knew, as he turned back toward the abbey, that faith was not the absence of struggle, but the act of returning, again and again, to stillness. That night, the bell rang for prayer, and the choir's voices rose once more into the darkness, weaving through the air like smoke, reaching upward to a heaven that always listened. Winter came early to Burgundy that year, creeping over the hills like a slow shadow. The first snows fell before the harvest was gathered, blanketing the fields with a thin white sorrow. By the time the monks of Cluny realized how poor the yield would be, it was too late. The granaries, once filled with wheat and barley, stood half empty, their echo a haunting sound that no prayer could quiet. Brother Anselm watched as the lay brothers loaded the last sacks of grain into the storehouse, their faces lined with worry. The abbot stood nearby, his hood drawn against the wind, his eyes deep with thought. "We have enough for 2 months, perhaps 3, he said quietly to Anselm. "After that, only God knows." The cold deepened, days shortened. Frost crawled across the cloisters, making the stones crack beneath their sandals. The air itself felt sharper, more brittle, as if every breath carried the taste of hunger. Yet the rhythm of monastic life went on. The bells still rang, the psalms still rose, the candles still burned in the chapel. But beneath the surface of that sacred order, unease whispered like a ghost. At first, it was small sacrifices. The monks ate less bread, thinned their broth with water, gave up the dried fish that had once graced their tables on feast days. No one complained. The rule of St. Benedict taught moderation in all things, and fasting was, after all, a form of devotion. But as the weeks passed, even the most devout among them began to feel the weight of their empty stomachs, the faint tremor in their hands during morning prayers. Outside the monastery walls, peasants from the surrounding lands came begging for help. Men hollow-eyed from hunger, women carrying children too weak to cry. They gathered at the gate, wrapped in rags, their breath clouding the air. The porter gave what little could be spared, crusts of bread, bowls of thin stew, but it was never enough. One bitter morning, a woman arrived carrying her son, no more than 10 years old. The boy's skin was pale, his lips cracked, his eyes distant. "Please," the mother whispered, "just a little bread. He hasn't eaten in 2 days." Brother Anselm was there when the porter turned her away. Not out of cruelty, but necessity. The abbey could not feed everyone, not when their own supply was running low. The woman fell to her knees, weeping softly, holding her child close. Something within Anselm broke. He went to the kitchen and took his own portion of bread, the small ration allotted for supper, and brought it to her. "Take this," he said, his voice trembling. "May it give you strength." The woman looked up, tears freezing on her cheeks. "God bless you, Father," she whispered. That night, when the monks gathered for Compline, Abbot Bernard's eyes found Anselm across the chapel. After the prayers, he called him aside. "You gave away your ration," the abbot said softly. It was not a question. Anselm bowed his head. "Yes, Father. The boy would have died," the abbot sighed. "And if every monk did the same, how many of us would remain strong enough to pray for them? Charity must be balanced with wisdom." "I understand," said Anselm, though his heart did not. The famine deepened. Rumors spread of villages abandoned, of bandits roaming the frozen roads, of entire families lost to the cold. The monks prayed for mercy, but heaven remained silent, and the snow kept falling. One morning, during the reading of the rule, Brother Hugo, the youngest of the novices, collapsed mid-chant. He had grown pale and thin, his hands shaking as he tried to rise. "Forgive me," he murmured, but his voice was barely a whisper. Anselm knelt beside him, helping him to his feet. The boy was light as a bundle of sticks. That night, Anselm brought him a secret portion of broth, richer than the communal meal. Hugo drank it gratefully, his eyes filled with tears. "Brother," he whispered, "why does God test us so?" Anselm hesitated before answering. "Perhaps because faith without hunger is easy." In the following days, more monks fell ill, some with fevers, others simply from weakness. The infirmary was full, and the candles burned late into the night. Yet amid the suffering, something profound began to emerge. The brothers, though frail, grew gentler toward one another. They shared what little they had. They helped each other to rise during prayers, supported each other through the long hours of work. The Abbey's great bells, once symbols of majesty and order, now sounded like a lament, tolling through the cold air, echoing over empty fields. Still, they rang. Always they rang. Then, one afternoon, as Anselm worked in the kitchen, a shout came from the watchtower. "Riders! From the north!" The brothers rushed to the courtyard, their hearts racing. A small caravan approached, carts laden with sacks, barrels, bundles of cloth. At their head rode a messenger bearing the seal of the Count of Mâcon, a noble patron of Cluny. "By the grace of God," the messenger cried, "aid has come. The Count sends grain, oil, and wine to sustain the holy brothers of Cluny through this season of trial." Tears filled Anselm's eyes as the carts rolled in. Some monks fell to their knees in gratitude. Even Abbot Bernard's stoic face softened, his lips moving in silent prayer. The refectory was soon alive with motion. Barrels opened, bread baked, bowls filled. That night, for the first time in many weeks, laughter returned to the tables. When all had eaten, Abbot Bernard rose and lifted his cup. "Brothers," he said, "the Lord has shown us mercy. But remember, we are not saved because we prayed louder or longer than others. We are saved so that we may serve. Tomorrow, we open our gates again to those who hunger beyond our walls." And so they did. The next morning, the courtyard filled with the poor once more. This time, there was enough. Bowls were filled, bread passed from hand to hand. The monks moved among the people, offering food, water, comfort, not as lords, but as servants. Brother Anselm found the same woman he had helped weeks before. Her son was stronger now, his cheeks no longer hollow. She looked up at him and smiled. "You saved him," she whispered. Anselm shook his head gently. "It was not I. It was the mercy that flows through all of us." That night, when the candles burned low in the chapel, the brothers sang a hymn of thanksgiving. The voices rose slowly, reverently, like embers lifting from a dying fire. Anselm felt the sound pass through him, not just a song of gratitude, but of endurance. For he had learned something that winter, something the silence of Cluny had not taught him before, that faith is not only prayer in peace, but steadfastness in hunger. That devotion is not measured by comfort, but by compassion when comfort is gone. As the final notes of the hymn faded, the abbot whispered the closing benediction. "May our hearts remain full, even when our hands are empty." And outside, beyond the walls, the snow began to melt. Spring came late that year, as though the world itself had forgotten warmth. Yet when it did arrive, it came softly, with thawing streams, the scent of wet earth, and the distant hum of bees over fields that once lay barren. Life returned to Cluny in slow, deliberate breaths. The monks worked to repair the damage left by winter, reseeding the gardens, mending the walls cracked by frost, and giving thanks for every sprout that broke the soil. Brother Anselm, though thinner than before, felt his strength returning. His hands were rough from labor, but his heart, strangely, had grown calmer through the hardship. The famine had stripped away his certainties, leaving only faith itself, quiet, unadorned, real. Yet even in that peace, something new began to stir, something subtler than hunger, something far more dangerous. It began in the scriptorium. The scriptorium of Cluny was unlike any in Europe. Light streamed through tall, narrow windows, falling upon rows of desks where monks bent in silence, their quills scratching steadily across parchment. The smell of ink and vellum filled the air, mingling with the faint sweetness of candle wax. It was here that Anselm spent his hours, copying sacred texts, illuminating margins with delicate vines and golden letters. His work was precise, almost reverent. Each stroke of ink felt like prayer. But as the weeks went on, word began to spread among the brothers that his calligraphy was exceptional, more elegant than any seen at Cluny in years. One day, Abbot Bernard entered the scriptorium unannounced. He walked slowly between the desks, his eyes scanning the pages. When he stopped behind Anselm, the room seemed to fall even more silent. The abbot studied the page, a psalter adorned with fine crimson borders and illuminated capitals of deep blue and gold. The artistry was extraordinary. After a long pause, the abbot spoke. "You have been given a gift, Brother Anselm. This work honors the word." Anselm bowed his head. "All gifts belong to God, Father." "Indeed," said the abbot, "yet some are given so that they may be shared. I will send this psalter to Rome. The Holy Father himself should see the devotion of Cluny's sons." The words filled Anselm with both pride and unease. That night, as he lay in his narrow bed, the thought would not leave him. Rome, his work, seen by the Pope himself. The very idea felt unreal. He told himself it did not matter, that glory was nothing in the sight of God. But the human heart is not easily silenced. Somewhere deep within, a small bright ember of vanity began to glow. Weeks passed, and the scriptorium became his world. He worked longer hours, often skipping rest, driven by something he did not fully understand. Other monks began to defer to him, asking for his judgment on their work. "Brother Anselm," they said, "you have the steadiest hand in Cluny." Each compliment felt like a prayer turned slightly off-key, pleasing to hear, yet subtly discordant to the spirit. One afternoon, a messenger arrived from Rome. The Pope's reply came sealed in gold wax. Abbot Bernard read it aloud before the community. "The psalter from Cluny Abbey brings joy to our house and honor to the faith. The skill of your brother Anselm bears witness to divine inspiration. Let him continue his labors for the glory of God and Holy Church." The monks applauded softly, reverently. All eyes turned toward Anselm. He lowered his head, but his heart raced. Never before had his name been spoken in such a way. Never before had he felt this peculiar warmth, like sunlight through stained glass. That night, during Vespers, he struggled to focus on the Psalms. The words, once living, once music, now felt distant. His mind wandered, picturing Rome, imagining the papal halls, the admiration of men he had never met. Then, guilt washed over him like cold water. He whispered a prayer for humility, but the ember of pride refused to die. Days turned to weeks. The abbot assigned him new works, not just to copy, but to compose. Anselm began writing theological reflections, meditations on divine order and the beauty of silence. His words were elegant, learned, and sincere. Yet somewhere in their depth, the abbot sensed something shifting. A tone too self-assured, too pleased with its own grace. One evening, the abbot summoned him. They met in the garden where the sun was setting behind the cloister walls. "Brother Anselm," said the abbot, "you walk a fine path. The gift of understanding is a blessing, but it is also a test. The devil does not tempt the wise with sin. He tempts them with virtue. Take care that your wisdom does not become your pride." Anselm bowed deeply. "I understand, Father." But he did not. Not yet. For as the months went on, visitors began to arrive. Scholars, abbots, and nobles, drawn by the growing reputation of Cluny's learned monk. They sought his counsel, his translations, his insights. Some even brought him gifts, rare manuscripts, fine ink, parchment from distant lands. Anselm accepted them humbly, or so he thought. But humility, once conscious, is no longer pure. One night, he lingered in the scriptorium long after the others had gone. The candles flickered low, their wax pooling across the desks. On the table before him lay a half-finished manuscript, The Book of Hours he had been illuminating for the Archbishop of Lyon. He stared at the gold leaf, catching the candlelight, and thought of the glory such beauty brought to God and to himself. Then, faintly, he heard footsteps. He turned. It was Brother Hugo, the young novice he had once fed during the famine. "Brother," Hugo said softly, "you have not slept. Are you well?" Anselm smiled wearily. "I am well, brother. Only working." Hugo hesitated, glancing at the ornate page. "It is beautiful," he said, "but I sometimes wonder if beauty can lead us astray." Anselm's expression darkened. "Beauty is God's reflection, Hugo." "Yes," said Hugo quietly, "but even reflections can blind if we stare too long." For a long time, neither spoke. Then Hugo bowed and left, his sandals whispering across the stone floor. Anselm sat alone, staring at his work. The young novice's words lingered like a faint echo. For the first time, doubt crept into his mind, not about his faith, but about himself. Was he still serving God, or merely his own need to be remembered? That night, in his cell, he could not sleep. The wind howled outside, shaking the shutters. He rose and went to the chapel, where the crucifix stood illuminated by a single flame. Kneeling before it, he whispered, "Lord, take from me this pride that I cannot name. Let me vanish into your will as ink into the page." The flame flickered, then steadied. And in that stillness, Anselm felt something shift within him. Not a release, but a reckoning. He knew now that pride was not a sin one could cast off once and for all. It was a shadow, bound to every gift, every grace. It followed the devout as faithfully as their prayers. When dawn came, he returned to his work, but his hand moved slower, his heart quieter. He no longer sought perfection for its own sake. Each line became an act of surrender rather than mastery. Months later, when his Book of Hours was finished, he placed no signature at its end. Only a single line, written in tiny script beneath the final prayer. "May the work praise its maker, not its maker's hand." When Abbot Bernard saw this, he smiled. A small, knowing smile that said more than words. "You have learned, at last," he said. Anselm bowed his head, his heart lighter than it had been in years. The hunger for recognition faded like mist under morning sun, and in its place, something stronger took root. The quiet joy of being forgotten, yet useful. For in the silence of Cluny, where prayers rose and fell like the breath of God himself, the truest glory was not in being known, but in serving unseen. The morning sun rose pale over Cluny Abbey, casting long shadows across the cloisters. A cool breeze stirred the vines and lavender in the courtyard, carrying with it the scent of dew and wet stone. For Brother Anselm, the day began like any other. The bell had rung for matins, the candles flickered in the chapel, and the rhythm of prayer and labor called him forward. Yet this morning bore a weight unlike any before. Abbot Bernard summoned him to the chapter house, where the monks were gathered in silence. The room smelled of incense and polished wood, of stone warmed by the first rays of spring. Candles burned at the altar, and behind it, the abbot's eyes seemed to pierce through the dim light. "Brother Anselm," Bernard said, his voice calm yet carrying the authority of decades, "the abbey has been entrusted with a sacred manuscript, a codex written by Saint Benedict himself, recently returned to our care from Rome. It is to be delivered to the monastery at Vézelay, a pilgrimage of devotion and trust. I ask you to carry it." Anselm felt a tremor in his hands. The codex was not only a treasure of knowledge, it was a symbol of the abbey's faith, its connection to the wider church. To carry it meant responsibility, danger, and the unknown beyond Cluny's protective walls. "I will go, Father," Anselm said, bowing low. "May God guide me." The abbot placed a hand on his shoulder. "Remember, brother, the journey is not only of the body, but of the soul. Guard the manuscript with care, guard your heart with humility, and let nothing sway you from your purpose. Preparations began immediately. Anselm packed only what was necessary: a small leather satchel, a change of habit, a few provisions, and a sturdy walking staff. The codex itself was wrapped in layers of cloth, bound with leather straps, its pages inscribed with golden lettering that caught the sunlight even through the wrappings. The abbey gates opened that morning with a rare sense of ceremony. Fellow monks gathered to bid him farewell. Brother Hugo, now healthier and more confident after surviving the famine, stepped forward. "May your steps be guided by heaven, brother," he said quietly. Anselm bowed. "And may your prayers accompany me." The road to Vézelay stretched across hills and valleys, forests and rivers, villages and towns. At first the journey seemed tranquil. Birds called from the trees, streams sparkled in the sunlight, and the early spring flowers lined the path. Anselm's steps were measured, his mind focused on prayer and meditation. But soon, the perils of the world beyond Cluny made themselves known. Bandits roamed the roads, desperate men who took what they could from travelers. On the second day, as he crossed a narrow pass, he heard the sound of hooves behind him. A group of armed riders, their faces hidden by rough hoods. "Stop, monk!" one of them shouted, raising a crude spear. "What do you carry?" Anselm's heart raced, but his voice remained calm. "Only a sacred book, entrusted to me by the abbot of Cluny. I mean no harm." The bandits laughed, a harsh sound that echoed against the cliffs. "Books are worthless to us. Gold, silver, wine, those are treasures." Anselm's hands tightened around the straps of the codex. His mind raced. What would the abbot have me do? What is the will of God in this moment? A miracle of timing, or perhaps the quiet hand of providence, allowed him to slip into a narrow crevice between rocks, his small frame hidden. The bandits passed, unaware of his presence, and he emerged only when the sounds of hooves faded. Breathless, he continued on, his faith deepened by the danger he had narrowly escaped. Days turned into a week, and the landscape changed from rolling hills to denser forests. At night, he slept beneath trees, wrapped in his cloak, the codex secured at his chest. He prayed continually, not just for safety, but for clarity and courage. Each step became a meditation. Each hill climbed a symbol of the soul's struggle toward virtue. In one village, he encountered a sick child, feverish and shivering. Though his own provisions were limited, he offered the last of his bread and a cup of water. The child's mother blessed him, and for a moment, Anselm felt the profound joy of mercy, the reward of service that needed no recognition. As he approached the Loire River, the challenges grew. The bridge, old and crumbling, was nearly impassable. The river's current roared like a beast awakened from sleep, threatening to sweep all away. Anselm knelt by the banks, praying for guidance. He tested the bridge carefully, stepping one foot before the other. The planks groaned beneath him, but the codex remained secure, pressed against his chest. Crossing the river, he felt a mixture of fear and triumph. The physical trials of the journey mirrored the spiritual trials of his life. Temptation, fear, humility, and perseverance. Each danger, each small act of mercy or courage, forged him further into the monk he was meant to become. By the time Vézelay appeared on the horizon, perched atop its hill like a beacon of faith, Anselm was weary but unbroken. The town streets were busy with pilgrims, merchants, and travelers from distant lands. The cathedral's towers rose above, their stone spires catching the light of the late afternoon sun. The Archbishop of Vézelay himself greeted Anselm at the gates, awe in his eyes, as he beheld the codex. "Brother, you have brought a treasure of immeasurable value, not merely for its words, but for the faith and courage with which you protected it," he said. Anselm knelt, laying the codex at the Archbishop's feet. "It belongs to God and his church," he said simply. The Archbishop nodded. "And yet your devotion will be remembered here for generations." That night, as Anselm prayed in the cathedral, he reflected upon the journey. Every hardship, every fear, every small act of kindness had brought him closer to understanding. It was not glory or recognition that defined a life of devotion, but the courage to act rightly, even when no eyes were upon you. In the quiet of the cathedral, surrounded by the candle's golden glow and the distant hum of the town, Brother Anselm felt a profound peace. He had faced the world, its dangers and temptations, and returned not with treasure, but with faith renewed, heart steady, and soul aligned with the divine rhythm he had first learned within Cluny's walls. And as he knelt in the hush of the cathedral, the distant bells calling evening prayer drifted through the air, a familiar echo of home. He knew that tomorrow, the journey back to Cluny would begin, another test, another pilgrimage of faith. But he was ready. For he had learned that the road, with all its perils and wonders, was itself a path to God. The road back to Cluny was long and quiet, the memory of Vézelay lingering in Brother Anselm's mind like the faint echo of a bell. The codex, now safely delivered, had left him with a lightness of spirit, but also a deepened awareness of the world beyond the cloister walls. He had seen both devotion and fear, generosity and greed. He had walked paths of danger and mercy alike, and through it all, his faith had endured. Yet no journey, however virtuous, could shield one from the storms that brew closer to home. As Cluny's gates came into view, Anselm felt a subtle tension in the air, a dissonance that did not belong to the familiar rhythm of the monastery. The courtyard was filled with activity, but it was not the quiet, orderly bustle he remembered. Voices murmured in corners, glances darted furtively between brothers, and the abbey's walls seemed to hum with a low, restless energy. Upon entering the cloister, he was greeted not with the usual warmth of brotherly welcome, but with the measured nods of monks who carried the weight of unspoken unease. Abbot Bernard met him at the chapter house, his brow furrowed, lips pressed thin. "Brother Anselm," Bernard said, his voice low and cautious, "your journey has been a blessing to the abbey, but it seems discord has found its way into our midst while you were away." Anselm's heart quickened. "Discord, Father. What has happened?" Bernard led him into the chapter house, where the gathered monks sat in tense silence. "It is the matter of our influence," the abbot began. "Some of our brethren have grown ambitious, seeking positions of power and authority beyond what the rule permits. Others have questioned my guidance, whispering of reforms and new interpretations of obedience." The words struck Anselm like a cold wind. He had left Cluny as a monk devoted to prayer, discipline, and learning. He returned to a subtle battlefield of ambition and envy. Even within walls dedicated to God, the human heart could breed intrigue. Over the following days, the abbey became a place of careful observation. Brother Anselm noticed subtle changes in behavior. Brother Thomas, who had once been a gentle novice, now lingered near the abbot's quarters, speaking in hushed tones to other monks. Brother Martin, skilled in administration, questioned decisions publicly in chapter meetings, his tone sharp, his eyes daring. Even the novices, usually oblivious to politics, whispered behind hands, spreading rumors that twisted truth into suspicion. Anselm struggled to understand the currents at play. He had faced external dangers, bandits, rivers, harsh weather, but these internal conflicts were far more treacherous. One could hide from a thief or a storm, but one could not hide from the duplicity of a brother. One evening, as twilight draped the cloisters in silver shadow, Anselm was summoned by the abbot. Bernard's expression was grave. "There is a petition," he said quietly, placing a sealed scroll before Anselm. "It claims that I have mismanaged the abbey's wealth, that our charity is used for vanity rather than necessity. It is signed by several respected monks. I would have you read it and advise me." Anselm's hands shook slightly as he opened the scroll. The words were carefully chosen, elegant yet poisonous. They implied mismanagement, hypocrisy, and arrogance, charges that, though untrue, could fracture the community if left unchecked. "Father," Anselm said after reading, "these accusations, they are false, but I understand why they worry some brothers. Fear can be as persuasive as truth. Bernard nodded, his eyes heavy with concern. Indeed. And fear, once allowed to fester, can lead to rebellion. Over the next weeks, Anselm became a quiet intermediary, moving between factions, listening, observing, guiding. He met with Brother Thomas in the scriptorium, watching as the young man carefully arranged manuscripts. "Thomas," Anselm said gently, "our work is for God, not for the envy of men. Let your hands honor the rule, not ambition." Thomas's eyes flared with indignation. "And who decides what honors God, Anselm? Are you the judge now?" "I am only a brother," Anselm replied. "Yet a brother who fears the abbey may crumble if we place pride above prayer." Thomas stared at him, a mix of anger and hesitation in his gaze, before turning away. It was a small victory, yet fragile. Meanwhile, Brother Martin's criticisms continued in chapter meetings. He argued over the allocation of resources, the choice of guests, the interpretation of certain passages in the rule. Anselm listened carefully, learning the art of patience. Sometimes, silence was stronger than speech. Sometimes, a gentle word could redirect fury more than a rebuke. The tension reached its height when a visiting bishop arrived, seeking to inspect the abbey's accounts and governance. The ambitious monks whispered constantly, presenting evidence of supposed mismanagement, while Bernard maintained a calm, unshakable demeanor. Anselm watched as the bishop's eyes scanned the ledgers, his hands touching each carefully maintained account. At last, the bishop spoke. "Abbot Bernard, your stewardship is thorough and faithful. These accusations, though well presented, bear no truth. The abbey thrives not on vanity or greed, but on devotion and careful labor." A collective sigh of relief passed through the monks. Some hung their heads in shame, others exchanged wary glances. The lesson was clear. Ambition unchecked could blind even the devout, but truth, grounded in humility, endured. Anselm walked through the cloisters that evening, reflecting on the events. He realized that the greatest trials were not always those faced in the wilderness or on the road, but those that took root in the hearts of men, even in holy places. Pride, envy, and ambition could enter silently, like shadows, and the vigilance of the spirit was required to keep them at bay. He paused by the fountain, its waters shimmering in the moonlight. The sound of flowing water reminded him of the journey to Vézelay, of rivers crossed, storms endured, and the quiet victories of faith. He knelt, whispering a prayer not only for himself, but for his brothers, that their hearts remained steadfast, their ambitions tempered, their devotion true. In the following days, the abbey returned to its rhythm. Work, prayer, study, and silence resumed their steady cadence. The ambitious whispers faded, replaced by the soft hum of shared labor. Yet Anselm carried the memory of those tense weeks like a scar and a lesson, that the world, even within sacred walls, is never free of challenge, and that true devotion requires not only faith in God, but wisdom in navigating the human heart. When he finally returned to the scriptorium, he found solace in the quiet scraping of quills, the scent of ink and parchment, and the simple act of creation. Each illuminated letter, each careful stroke, was now a meditation not only on beauty, but on humility. He had seen ambition's shadow and chosen the light of steadfast service instead. That night, as the abbey bells tolled for Compline, Anselm knelt in the chapel. The glow of candlelight painted his habit in warm tones, and the soft scent of incense hung in the air. He prayed quietly, his words simple yet profound. "Lord, grant that I may always serve, and never seek to be served. Let my heart be humble, my spirit patient, my hands steady in your work." The wind whispered through the cloisters, carrying the sound of distant bells and the faint rustle of pages. Anselm rose, his heart steady, his purpose clear. The abbey had endured trials, famine, temptation, ambition, and yet its walls still held faith, hope, and devotion. And within those walls, Brother Anselm knew He had found not only his place, but the enduring truth of service, humility, and unwavering commitment to God. The Abbey of Cluny, though a sanctuary of prayer and scholarship, was never fully isolated from the tides of the outside world. The fertile valleys and rolling hills of Burgundy had long been coveted by nobles and lords, and whispers of conflict drifted to the monastery like wind through the trees. In the spring following the resolution of the internal intrigues, news came that shook the abbey to its core. A skirmish between neighboring barons had escalated into open conflict, and the fighting now threatened the land surrounding Cluny itself. Brother Anselm learned of it first from the scouts who travelled along the main roads, their eyes sharp with caution, their words heavy with fear. Villages burned, peasants fled in terror, and roads, once safe for pilgrims and merchants, were now patrolled by armed men whose allegiance shifted with the highest bidder. The abbot gathered the monks in the chapter house to explain the situation. "Brothers," Bernard said, his voice steady, yet carrying the weight of worry, "the world beyond these walls rages with strife. Cluny is a house of God, and yet we are not untouched by his children's quarrels. We must remain vigilant, not with swords, but with prayer and wisdom." Anselm listened carefully, understanding the gravity of the message. Though the abbey had never been a fortress, its position and influence made it a potential target. Beyond the stone walls lay not only danger, but moral challenges, the temptation to intervene, to protect possessions, and even to judge. In the following days, scouts brought more troubling news. A band of marauders, taking advantage of the chaos, had begun raiding farms near the abbey. Smoke rose from distant villages, and the cries of frightened peasants echoed faintly on the wind. The monks could see the threat from the tower windows, the black smoke curling like fingers across the horizon. Abbot Bernard convened the senior brothers to discuss a course of action. "We cannot fight as soldiers do," he said, "but we can fortify what we can, provide shelter, and offer aid. If we act with wisdom and humility, we will preserve both our lives and our souls." Brother Anselm volunteered to assist in the preparations. Together with other monks, he reinforced doors, stocked provisions, and organized watch rotations along the perimeter walls. Though their hands were untrained for battle, their dedication was unwavering. Each night, the bell tolled more urgently, a reminder that vigilance was as necessary as prayer. Amid the preparations, Anselm also tended to those who sought refuge within Cluny's walls. Families from nearby villages arrived, frightened and famished, clutching children, elderly parents, and whatever meager possessions they could carry. The monks distributed food, blankets, and words of comfort, and Anselm found himself walking among them, listening to stories of loss and fear, praying for strength and guidance. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, a rider arrived bearing urgent news. The marauders were approaching, seeking to plunder any wealth left near Cluny. Anselm felt a chill run through him, but he knew panic would serve no one. He reported immediately to Abbot Bernard, who gathered the brothers once more. "Brothers," Bernard said, "we will not meet them with anger or weapons. Our walls will protect us, and our faith will guide us. When they come, we will offer only what we must to preserve life, but no more. God's will shall be our shield." That night, the first sounds of the marauders reached the abbey. The clatter of hooves, the harsh shouts of men, the barking of dogs. The monks knelt in the chapel, the Codex of Cluny placed before the altar, candles burning like steadfast sentinels. Anselm felt the familiar tremor of fear, yet he focused on prayer, repeating in his mind the lessons learned during the famine, the journey to Vézelay, and the intrigues within the abbey. Courage, he realized, was not the absence of fear, but the ability to act rightly despite it. The marauders arrived at dawn, a ragged, angry group with eyes gleaming at the sight of wealth. But Cluny was no easy target. The walls were high, the gates solid, and the monks, though unarmed, projected an unyielding calm. Abbot Bernard greeted the leader, a large man with a scar across his cheek, and spoke with measured words. "This is a house of God," the abbot said. We offer no gold, no riches, but you may rest, eat, and depart in peace. Harm none who seek refuge here, and you shall leave unchallenged." The leader laughed, a bitter, grating sound. "A house of prayer cannot stop men with swords." "Perhaps not with swords," Bernard replied, "but with truth and mercy." Anselm watched as the marauders hesitated. The calm, unwavering presence of the monks, the visible care for the refugees, and the silent, dignified authority of the abbot seemed to confound them. Slowly, reluctantly, the leader nodded. Food and water were offered sparingly, as promised, and then, as the sun climbed higher, the marauders departed, leaving the abbey and its occupants untouched. In the aftermath, the monks gathered in the cloisters, grateful for their safety. The refugees offered their thanks, tears in their eyes, and the abbey returned to its rhythm of prayer and labor. Anselm walked among the gardens and halls, reflecting on the events. Though no battle had been fought with steel, the test had been no less real. Courage, patience, and faith had prevailed where violence might have failed. Yet Anselm also understood the fragility of peace. The world outside remained dangerous, and Cluny's safety was never guaranteed. The experience deepened his sense of responsibility, not only for the codex or the abbey, but for the lives of those who trusted them. The spiritual and practical duties of the monks were intertwined, and each decision, however small, carried weight beyond immediate perception. That night, under the stars above the cloisters, Anselm knelt alone, feeling both relief and an aching awareness of the world's suffering. He prayed for the souls of the marauders, for the safety of the innocent, and for the strength to continue walking the path of service. The cold night air was crisp, but comforting, and the faint murmur of the Loire in the distance seemed like a whisper of divine reassurance. Through these trials, famine, temptation, intrigue, and now war, Brother Anselm had learned the enduring truth of his vocation. Faith was tested, not in comfort, but in the storms of the world. Virtue was proven not in solitude, but in the presence of fear, temptation, and danger. And within Cluny's walls, amid prayer, study, and labor, he found the courage to face both the world without and the shadows within. As the abbey slept, he rose from the garden, the moonlight casting long silver shadows across the stones. Tomorrow would bring more challenges, more responsibilities. But he was ready, for the path of the devoted is never easy, yet every step walked in faith brings one closer to the divine. The abbey had settled once more into its quiet rhythm when word arrived of a traveller approaching Cluny from the east. He came on horseback, a solitary figure cloaked in grey, his gait steady and his eyes bright with intelligence. The spring air carried news of him quickly through the abbey. A scholar, well versed in theology, languages, and the natural sciences, journeying from the courts of Toulouse, seeking the renowned wisdom of Cluny. Brother Anselm first saw him at the outer gate. The man dismounted with the grace of one accustomed to both travel and scrutiny. His hands were calloused yet precise, his satchel heavy with manuscripts and scrolls, and his gaze was fixed with a quiet curiosity upon the abbey itself. Abbot Bernard received the scholar in the chapter house. "Brother," he said, addressing Anselm, "this man comes not as a pilgrim, but as a seeker of knowledge. He wishes to speak with one who understands the texts and practices of Cluny, and I have asked you to assist him." Anselm felt a surge of apprehension. Though he had spent years in study, his knowledge remained humble, rooted in devotion rather than worldly learning. Yet the abbot's faith in him left little room for hesitation. The scholar introduced himself as Master Guillaume. His speech was precise, his tone courteous, yet inquisitive. "I have travelled far to see Cluny," he said, "for its reputation for both piety and learning has reached Toulouse. I wish to understand how the abbey balances devotion, scholarship, and service in a world so filled with uncertainty." Anselm led him through the cloisters, showing the scriptorium, the gardens, and the refectory. He explained the rhythms of monastic life: prayer at dawn, labor in the gardens, hours spent copying sacred texts, and the constant balance between humility and discipline. Guillaume listened with keen attention, occasionally taking notes in a small leather-bound journal. "What you describe is a life of simplicity," Guillaume said. "Yet I sense a profound complexity in the choices you must make. The world beyond these walls is filled with strife, ambition, and temptation. How do you guard your spirit against these influences?" Anselm paused, considering the question. The memory of famine, the journey to Vézelay, the intrigue among the monks, and the marauder's approach all surfaced in his mind. "Faith and discipline," he answered finally, "and humility. We cannot control the world, but we can control our hearts and our responses. Every temptation is a test, every challenge a chance to strengthen our devotion." Guillaume's eyes sparkled. "And yet, you have journeyed beyond Cluny, faced danger, and returned. You carry wisdom earned not in silence alone, but in experience. I wonder, Brother Anselm, whether knowledge is complete without the courage to act upon it." The words struck Anselm with a weight he had not anticipated. He led Guillaume to the scriptorium, where illuminated manuscripts and theological treatises lined the walls. Each text told a story of devotion, study, and labor, the cumulative wisdom of generations. Yet, as he looked upon them, Anselm realized that even the greatest scholarship was incomplete without the lessons of lived experience. Over the following days, Anselm and Guillaume engaged in long discussions. They debated the nature of God, the role of man in the divine order, and the importance of humility in the pursuit of knowledge. Guillaume spoke of distant lands, of universities rising in Paris, of scholars translating Greek and Arabic texts into Latin, of medicine, astronomy, and philosophy reaching new heights. Anselm listened, fascinated, yet acutely aware of the limits of his own experience. One evening, as candlelight flickered across the scriptorium, Guillaume asked a question that would linger in Anselm's mind, long after the scholar had retired to his quarters. "Brother Anselm, do you ever wonder why God has placed you here, in Cluny, when the world beyond these walls suffers so greatly? Is it not your duty to bring wisdom outward, as much as inward?" The question struck at the core of Anselm's soul. He had spent years within the abbey's walls, serving faithfully, yet he had rarely considered what role he might play beyond its cloistered sanctity. The thought unsettled him, revealing a tension between devotion and ambition, humility and responsibility. That night, he prayed long and deeply in the chapel. The flickering candlelight cast shadows across the stone walls, illuminating the faces of saints carved into the columns. He sought guidance, not for knowledge, but for clarity of purpose. The abbey had nurtured him, taught him the disciplines of prayer, labor, and study. But the world beyond called to him, a distant yet insistent voice demanding action, understanding, and courage. In the days that followed, Guillaume demonstrated remarkable insight and generosity. He assisted in the scriptorium, translating complex texts, advising on matters of arithmetic, astronomy, and theology. The monks watched with quiet admiration as the two men worked side by side, their shared pursuit of knowledge a living testament to the abbey's mission. Yet not all were pleased. Some monks viewed Guillaume's presence as a distraction, a potential source of pride or curiosity that might unsettle the fragile balance of devotion. Anselm noticed subtle murmurs, glances exchanged in the refectory, the occasional critique in chapter meetings. He understood then that knowledge, like power, could be both illuminating and divisive. One afternoon, Guillaume posed a final challenge. He laid a manuscript before Anselm, its pages dense with commentary and marginal notes in Latin and Greek. "Translate this," he said gently, "and consider not only the meaning of the words, but the questions they raise about faith, morality, and the human heart." Anselm spent hours at his desk, quill in hand, deciphering the intricate text. Each line demanded focus, each phrase careful thought. He realized that understanding was never complete. Each answer led to another question, each insight to deeper contemplation. And yet, in the act of translation, he discovered something more profound: the integration of learning and devotion, the union of mind and spirit, the living practice of faith through study. By the time the sun dipped below the cloister walls, Anselm had completed the translation. Guillaume examined the work carefully, nodding in approval. "You have not only translated the words, brother, but the meaning behind them. Your wisdom is tempered by humility, and that is the true measure of knowledge." Anselm felt a quiet satisfaction, yet also a stirring of responsibility. He knew that the abbey had given him more than sanctuary. It had given him preparation for journeys within and beyond, for service in ways both seen and unseen. Guillaume's visit was a reminder that the life of a monk was not only a life of contemplation, but a call to discernment, courage, and engagement with the wider world. As night fell over Cluny, Anselm walked the cloisters alone. The stars glittered above, mirrored in the still waters of the fountain. He reflected on the scholar's visit, on the questions raised, and on the path that lay ahead. He understood, with a clarity that both humbled and inspired, that faith and knowledge were not static. They demanded action, reflection, and courage. And he, Brother Anselm, would continue to walk that path, guided by prayer, devotion, and the lessons of both the abbey and the wider world beyond. Spring had ripened into early summer when the Abbey of Cluny received a visitor unlike any before. He arrived cloaked in tattered garments, mud-caked boots, and eyes wide with fear. At first glance, he appeared as a wandering traveler, yet there was a tension in his presence, a subtle urgency that spoke of peril. The abbey gates were closed for the midday prayers, yet Brother Anselm, walking the cloisters, noticed the figure lingering near the outer wall, glancing furtively over his shoulder. The man approached Anselm cautiously, lowering his hood. His face was pale and drawn, with a single streak of dried blood marring his cheek. "Please," he whispered, "I seek shelter. I am in grave danger and Cluny is my only hope." Anselm's mind raced. Cluny had always offered sanctuary, yet he had learned through years of service that such acts carried consequences. The abbey had faced marauders, famine, and intrigue, but harboring a fugitive noble might ignite the wrath of kings and barons alike. Still, the fear in the man's eyes stirred Anselm's compassion. "Follow me," he said quietly, leading the man into a secluded guest chamber. "Tell me your name and purpose." The man hesitated, then spoke. "I am Lord Henri de Montferrand, a minor noble from the region of Mâcon. My lands have been seized by a rival lord. I have been accused of treason, though falsely. If I am captured, I will be executed. Please hide me if you value mercy above all." Anselm felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. He knelt briefly in prayer, seeking guidance. "Lord, grant me wisdom. Let me act rightly, for the lives and souls before me are in your hands." He led Henri to a hidden chamber within the abbey, a room seldom used and known only to a few trusted brothers. There the fugitive was given food, water, and a place to rest. Anselm warned him gently, "You must remain silent. Speak to no one, for discovery may bring calamity upon us all." In the days that followed, Anselm struggled with a moral dilemma. The abbey's rule emphasized hospitality and mercy, yet it also demanded obedience, caution, and discernment. Every knock at the gate, every stranger in the courtyard, heightened his anxiety. He pondered the abbot's likely counsel. Bernard was wise and patient, yet even he could not shield the abbey from the consequences if word of Henri's presence spread. Meanwhile, Henri's presence created a subtle tension among the monks. Brother Thomas, always alert to deviation from the rule, noticed the unusual activity. "Anselm," he said one evening, "why do you linger so often in the guest quarters? There are whispers among the novices. Are you hiding something?" Anselm's heart pounded. The balance of secrecy and truth was delicate. He spoke calmly. "We shelter those in need, Thomas. Remember that mercy is a pillar of our faith." Thomas frowned but did not press further, though suspicion lingered in his eyes. As the week passed, Anselm learned more of Henry's plight. Letters and messages smuggled in by loyal retainers revealed a web of political intrigue, false accusations of treason, ambitious rivals, and corrupt officials seeking to claim Henry's lands. Anselm realized that sheltering him was more than an act of mercy. It was a quiet engagement in the tangled politics of Burgundy, a test of both faith and prudence. The tension escalated when a patrol from the rival lord's territory approached the abbey, inquiring about the whereabouts of the fugitive. Anselm met them at the gates, his voice steady, though his mind raced with calculations of risk. "There is no one here by that name," he said. "You will find nothing at Cluny but pilgrims and servants." The patrol's leader, a grizzled man with piercing eyes, studied him carefully. "You are sure? Cluny has a reputation for sheltering those who would escape justice." "God's house shelters the innocent," Anselm replied. "Your accusations are yours alone. We offer no judgment here, only sanctuary." After a tense silence, the patrol departed, muttering among themselves. Anselm exhaled, knowing that danger was far from over. That night, he knelt in the chapel, praying for guidance. His mind wrestled with questions that had no easy answers. Was he merely preserving a man's life, or was he entangling the abbey in political webs that could bring ruin? Could mercy ever justify deception, even in the service of God? Abbot Bernard, sensing the strain upon Anselm, called him to the chapter house. "I know the burden you carry," he said gently. "There are times when the rule must be weighed against necessity, and the heart must discern God's will in actions that are neither simple nor safe. But Father," Anselm said, his voice heavy with doubt, "if I am discovered, the abbey may suffer. I have promised secrecy, yet I feel the risk growing with each passing day." Bernard placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Faith requires courage, not only in obedience, but in discernment. You have acted with mercy and prudence. Trust in God and trust in the judgment of those who guide you." In the following days, Anselm orchestrated subtle measures to protect Henri. He assigned chores in the upper gardens, distracting the other monks while ensuring that the fugitive remained unseen. He arranged for messages to be sent to loyal allies outside the abbey, seeking safe passage to a distant monastery where Henri could remain under ecclesiastical protection. The tension reached its peak when a messenger arrived under the cover of night, bearing news that the rival Lord S men were pursuing Henri to the very edges of Cluny S lands. Anselm guided Henry through secret passages, using tunnels and concealed stairways that few knew existed. The journey was harrowing. Every step could mean discovery and the potential desecration of the abbey's sanctuary. Finally, as dawn broke, they reached the outer gate. Waiting were loyal retainers, ready to escort Henry safely to a distant monastery under the protection of a sympathetic bishop. Anselm handed over the fugitive, his hands trembling slightly with exhaustion, relief, and a sense of sacred duty fulfilled. Henry grasped Anselm's hands with gratitude. "Brother, I owe you my life. God will remember this mercy." Anselm nodded quietly. "May your heart remain humble, your actions just, and your faith unwavering. Go in peace." After Henry departed, Anselm returned to Cluny, weary but spiritually strengthened. The abbey's walls once again felt serene, the cloisters filled with the familiar rhythm of prayer, labor, and study. Yet he carried within him the lesson of moral courage, that faith demands not only obedience, but wisdom, that mercy sometimes requires risk, and that the boundaries of right action are often tested in the shadows between law ethics and divine will. That night, in the quiet chapel, Anselm knelt before the altar, candles flickering softly. He whispered a prayer for Henri, for the abbey, and for the countless souls whose lives would be touched by acts of mercy often hidden from the world. In the silence, he felt a profound peace, that to act rightly, even in fear and uncertainty, was the truest path of devotion. and the measure of a life lived in service to God and man. Summer had settled across Burgundy, its warmth spilling over the abbey's stone walls. The gardens vibrant with roses and herbs, the fields golden with ripening wheat. Cluny hummed with the familiar rhythm of devotion, study, and labour. Yet beneath this serenity, Brother Anselm felt an undercurrent of unease. The past months, the marauders, the intrigues, the fugitive noble, had tested his courage, patience, and judgment, leaving subtle scars upon his spirit. He had prayed, reflected, and acted, but he sensed that the trials of the abbey were far from over. It began on a quiet afternoon. Anselm was in the scriptorium, copying a manuscript on the lives of saints, when smoke drifted in through the upper windows. At first, it seemed like a distant chimney fire from the nearby village, yet a sharp, acrid scent soon told him otherwise. He ran to the cloisters, the sound of alarm bells beginning to echo across the abbey. Flames had ignited in the western wing, near the storerooms where parchments, manuscripts, and treasured texts were kept. Chaos erupted. Monks shouted orders, some carrying buckets of water from the fountains, others attempting to remove manuscripts and sacred objects from the path of the fire. The heat was intense, the smoke thick, and the walls seemed to tremble with the roar of the blaze. Anselm, heart pounding, moved swiftly, directing novices and older brothers alike. The fire spread faster than anticipated, feeding on dry wood and parchment, threatening the treasury of knowledge painstakingly preserved for generations. Amid the turmoil, Anselm confronted an unbearable decision. Some manuscripts were too numerous and fragile to save. They had to choose which texts could be carried out and which would be left to the flames. The weight of history and devotion pressed upon him. He knelt over the manuscripts, whispering prayers as he made choices, tears stinging his eyes. "Forgive me, Lord, for I cannot save all. Let your will guide my hands." Brother Thomas appeared at his side, carrying a bundle of illuminated texts. "Anselm," he gasped, coughing through the smoke. "We cannot carry everything. The fire is too strong. We must prioritize." Anselm nodded, his mind racing. "Save the codices, the theological works, and the annals. The rest, we pray for their protection in God's hands." The brothers worked with a quiet, desperate determination. The water from the fountains hissed as it hit the flames. The smoke burned their lungs, and the heat made the stone floors blister beneath their feet. Anselm's habit clung to him, drenched with sweat, yet he did not falter. He was driven by faith, by duty, and by the understanding that in this trial, every act of courage mattered. Hours passed, each minute stretching unbearably. The fire raged like a living beast, devouring walls, wood, and manuscripts alike. The sound of cracking timber and falling beams punctuated the shouts and prayers of the monks. Anselm felt a sharp pang of fear, not for himself, but for the abbey, for the sacred treasures, and for the continuity of Cluny's legacy. Amid the flames, a sudden collapse of the roof forced him to take cover, shielding a group of novices beneath a stone archway. Smoke filled his lungs. Coughing tore through his chest, yet he continued to guide, instruct, and encourage. His hands, blistered and blackened, moved tirelessly, passing manuscripts, signaling directions, and bolstering the spirits of those around him. When at last the fire was brought under control, scorched timber still smouldering, Anselm emerged from the rubble, his body exhausted, his eyes red from smoke and sorrow. The western wing was devastated, many priceless manuscripts reduced to ash. Yet the abbey itself had survived, its walls largely intact, its spirit unbroken. In the days that followed, the monks labored to rebuild, salvaging what they could and cataloguing the losses. Anselm wandered among the ruins, each charred manuscript a painful reminder of what had been lost, yet also a testament to what had been preserved. He realized that even in destruction, there was a lesson. Faith was not in the physical, but in the endurance of the spirit, the devotion of the community, and the continuity of prayer and learning. One evening, as the sun set over the cloisters, Casting long shadows across the blackened stones, Anselm climbed the tower to pray. The flames had left scars, but they had not extinguished hope. He whispered a prayer for strength, for guidance, and for the humility to accept loss as part of the divine plan. Abbot Bernard joined him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Brother Anselm," he said gently, "fire tests both stone and spirit. You have seen what can be lost, yet also what endures. Remember, it is not the walls or manuscripts alone that define Cluny, but the faith and devotion of those who serve within them." Anselm nodded, understanding deeply. The fire had been a trial of courage, patience, and faith. It had tested his leadership, his judgment, and his spirit. Yet it had also revealed the resilience of the abbey and the unity of its community. In the following weeks, Anselm dedicated himself to rebuilding not only the physical structures, but the spiritual fabric of Cluny. He taught the novices lessons gleaned from the fire, the importance of vigilance, humility in the face of loss, and courage in the service of God. Every beam replaced, every manuscript restored, became an act of devotion, a living prayer against despair. The experience also deepened Anselm's understanding of divine providence. He had prayed for guidance, witnessed devastation, and yet seen resilience and mercy flourish. Faith, he realized, was strengthened not in comfort, but through trial. Knowledge, devotion, and courage were intertwined, each demanding perseverance, humility, and discernment. At night, as the abbey settled into quiet again, Anselm walked the charred cloisters, the scent of smoke lingering in the air, the stars above shining with serene clarity. He reflected on the fragility of human effort and the enduring strength of the spirit. Loss was inevitable, yet faith, community, and devotion could endure beyond the flames. The fire had tested him, challenged his beliefs, and threatened to overwhelm his spirit. But through prayer, action, and steadfastness, he had endured. And in that endurance, he discovered a deeper sense of purpose: to serve God faithfully, to guide his brothers with wisdom and humility, and to face the trials of the world, both seen and unseen, with courage and devotion. The early autumn wind carried a crispness that hinted at the coming winter. Yet the Abbey of Cluny remained alive with the gentle rhythm of prayer, labor, and study. Brother Anselm had grown into a figure of quiet authority among the monks, his presence both reassuring and contemplative. The memory of the fire still lingered in the charred timbers of the western wing, yet the abbey had recovered, its walls echoing with devotion and perseverance. It was during Vespers that the news arrived. A pilgrim, traveling from distant Compostela, was approaching the abbey, bearing a relic of great renown. The messenger, breathless from the journey, described the pilgrim's piety, his long and arduous travels, and the sacred object he carried. A fragment of the true cross, wrapped in linen, protected within a small wooden reliquary. Such relics were rare, their presence often inspiring miracles or deep spiritual reflection. Anselm, intrigued and cautious, went to meet the pilgrim at the outer gate. The man was tall, weathered by travel, yet his eyes shone with unwavering faith. The reliquary was held close to his chest, as though its very weight symbolized the gravity of his journey. "Peace be with you," Anselm said, bowing slightly. "You seek shelter and blessing in Cluny?" The pilgrim smiled, a mixture of humility and resolve. "I seek both," he replied, "and I carry a gift for the abbey, a relic of the cross upon which our Lord suffered. I have journeyed far to ensure it finds a place of honor among those devoted to God's work." Abbot Bernard, informed of the arrival, called a chapter meeting to determine the appropriate reception. The monks gathered in the cloisters, the autumn light filtering through the arches, casting patterns upon the stone floor. Anselm felt a thrill of anticipation. The arrival of a relic was an extraordinary event, one that could inspire both awe and spiritual renewal. "The relic must be treated with the utmost reverence," Bernard instructed. "It will remain under the protection of the abbey, and all who encounter it shall do so with humility and devotion. Brother Anselm, I entrust you with its care." The responsibility weighed heavily upon Anselm. He had faced famine, fire, and moral dilemmas, yet the task of safeguarding an object of such sacred significance stirred a new sense of purpose within him. The pilgrim was led to the chapter house, where the reliquary was carefully placed upon a table draped in white linen. Candlelight flickered, casting a soft glow upon the ancient wood and the delicate fragment it contained. Anselm approached with reverence, feeling a profound connection to the centuries of devotion that had preceded this moment. Over the following days, Anselm observed remarkable events. Novices and older monks alike reported visions during prayer, feelings of peace and inspiration, and in some cases, minor healings of ailments long endured. The air within the abbey seemed charged with sanctity, and the communal spirit deepened. Yet alongside the wonder came challenges. Some monks were skeptical, questioning whether the reported miracles were genuine or the result of imagination and fervent hope. Others feared that the attention the relic attracted might invite envy or danger from the secular world, recalling the marauders, the fugitive noble, and the fire that had once threatened the abbey's walls. Anselm wrestled with these concerns, seeking guidance in prayer. He spent hours in the chapel, quill and codex set aside, meditating upon the mystery of faith and the interplay between divine providence and human perception. The relic, he realized, was both a symbol and a test, a challenge to discern true devotion from mere superstition, to inspire courage, humility, and charity rather than pride or fear. One evening, as he knelt before the relic, the pilgrim approached him. "Brother Anselm," he said softly, "do you feel its presence?" Anselm hesitated, then nodded. "I do. Not as a certainty of miracles, but as a stirring of the heart. It calls us to deeper devotion, patience, and service." The pilgrim smiled. "Faith is like a flame, sometimes flickering, sometimes steady, but always demanding attention and care. The cross suffered, and yet it endures. So too must your spirit endure through trials and doubt." In the following weeks, Anselm organized readings and reflections around the relic. Monks shared their experiences, meditated on scripture, and engaged in acts of charity inspired by the sense of divine presence. Even the novices who had arrived with trepidation felt emboldened, their prayers gaining depth and sincerity. Anselm himself experienced a profound spiritual awakening. He understood that faith was not passive, nor was it merely adherence to the rule. It was a living, breathing practice that required courage, reflection, and openness to the mysterious workings of God. The relic became a focal point for this realization, a tangible reminder of sacrifice, perseverance, and the interconnectedness of all who seek the divine. Yet life at Cluny demanded balance. The mundane duties of the abbey continued, copying manuscripts, tending gardens, cooking meals, and maintaining vigilance. Anselm learned to integrate this extraordinary experience with the ordinary rhythm of monastic life, understanding that holiness was not found only in miracles, but also in the devotion applied to each task, no matter how small. The relic's presence also attracted visitors, pilgrims from nearby villages, traveling clergy, and nobles seeking guidance or blessing. Each arrival brought new challenges, requiring careful judgment, hospitality, and discretion. Anselm guided these interactions with wisdom, humility, and patience, ensuring that Cluny remained a sanctuary, not a spectacle. One night, as the moon cast silver light over the cloisters, Anselm knelt in silent reflection. He thought of the fire, the fugitive noble, the scholar Guillaume, and the marauders, trials that had shaped him, refined his judgment, and deepened his understanding of mercy and courage. And now, with the relic before him, he sensed a quiet yet profound calling: to live with integrity, to act with compassion, and to remain steadfast in the pursuit of both knowledge and devotion. The pilgrim, preparing to continue his journey, entrusted the relic to the abbey for safekeeping. "Keep it with care," he said. "Let it inspire, guide, and test you. And remember, the true miracle is not in what it does, but in what it calls forth in the hearts of those who encounter it. As the pilgrim departed, Anselm felt a mixture of awe, gratitude, and renewed purpose. The Abbey of Cluny had faced famine, fire, political intrigue, and moral dilemmas, yet it endured. Faith, he realized, was not static. It was tested, challenged, and awakened through both extraordinary and ordinary events. And in this awakening, Anselm found clarity: to serve God faithfully, to guide his brothers wisely, and to meet the trials of the world with courage, humility, and unwavering devotion. The nights that followed were filled with prayer, study, and reflection. The relic remained enshrined in the abbey, its presence a continual reminder of the mystery of faith and the power of devotion. Anselm, strengthened in spirit and enriched in understanding, walked the cloisters with a quiet confidence, prepared to face whatever challenges the world, or God, might place before him next. The chill of early winter settled over Burgundy, crisp and sharp, frosting the edges of the abbey's cloisters. The gardens were bare, save for hardy herbs clinging to life, and the fields beyond lay dormant beneath a thin veil of frost. Within Cluny, however, the rhythm of monastic life remained unbroken. Prayer still marked the hours, manuscripts continued to be copied, and the cloisters echoed with the measured steps of devoted monks. It was in this season of quiet diligence that a messenger arrived from the neighbouring abbey of St. Gall. His garments were formal, though travel-worn, and his expression carried a mixture of respect and urgency. He bore a letter sealed with the abbot's crest, addressed to Abbot Bernard. The message requested Cluny's counsel in resolving a theological dispute that had arisen among the monks of St. Gall. Two senior brothers, both learned in scripture and doctrine, had disagreed on the interpretation of certain passages concerning the nature of Christ's presence in the Eucharist. The dispute had grown so heated that it threatened the unity of the monastery, and the abbot sought Cluny's guidance to mediate the matter. Anselm, by now trusted as a voice of discernment and prudence, was called to assist. Alongside him, a small delegation of Cluniac monks was appointed to travel to St. Gall, their purpose not to dictate, but to counsel, to foster reconciliation, and to illuminate the deeper principles of faith underlying the dispute. The journey north was arduous, the roads slick with mud and ice, the wind cutting through layers of wool and linen. Yet Anselm's mind was alive with anticipation and concern. The challenge ahead was not one of physical endurance, but of intellect, diplomacy, and spiritual insight. Upon arrival at St. Gall, the Cluniac delegation was received with formal ceremony. The disputing monks stood before them, tension visible in every gesture, every glance. One, Brother Conrad, was fiery and eloquent, arguing that the Eucharist must be understood literally, emphasizing the tangible presence of Christ in the consecrated elements. The other, Brother Adelmar, was contemplative, insisting that the mystery was symbolic and mystical, accessible through meditation and spiritual reflection rather than physical proof. The initial discussions were tense. Words carried the weight of doctrine, history, and pride. Monks on both sides referenced scripture, writings of the church fathers, and local tradition. Anselm listened carefully, noting the subtleties of argument, the concerns of both men, and the underlying anxieties about authority, obedience, and spiritual legitimacy. One evening, as the fire crackled in the monastery's great hall, Anselm spoke quietly with his fellow Cluniac monks. "The issue is not merely interpretation," he said. "It is fear. Fear of being wrong, fear of discord, fear that the mystery of God may escape our comprehension. We must approach this with humility, patience, and a recognition that truth is often veiled in layers of wisdom and experience." The next day, the formal debate commenced in the chapter house. Anselm addressed both monks and assembly with measured calm. "Brothers," he began, "we come not to judge but to illuminate. Doctrine is a guide to understanding God, not a weapon to divide his children. Let us seek a path that honors scripture, tradition, and the spirit of devotion that unites us." The discussion was long, intricate, and intense. Anselm drew upon texts from Augustine, Ambrose, and Bede, weaving theological insight with pastoral wisdom. He emphasized the importance of both reverence and comprehension, the balance between mystical faith and reasoned reflection. He encouraged Conrad and Adelmar to consider the broader purpose of their debate: the strengthening of the community, the deepening of devotion, and the nurturing of unity rather than division. As the hours passed, the atmosphere gradually shifted. The disputing monks, once rigid and defensive, began to see their positions not as oppositional, but as complementary. Conrad recognized the value of contemplative reflection in enhancing understanding, while Adelmar acknowledged the significance of tangible ritual in fostering communal faith. Anselm proposed a resolution. Both interpretations would be honored in practice, with emphasis on education and meditation to balance understanding with reverence. He suggested that the Abbey of St. Gall establish a period of joint study, reflection, and dialogue, allowing monks to explore the mystery of the Eucharist without fear of condemnation or discord. The proposal was met with tentative acceptance, and gradually, gratitude replaced tension. The assembly understood that Cluny's counsel was not an assertion of authority, but a guiding hand toward reconciliation, rooted in wisdom, humility, and devotion. During the days that followed, Anselm engaged in personal discussions with both Conrad and Adelmar. He spoke of his own experiences at Cluny, the fire, the fugitive noble, the pilgrim and the relic, illustrating how trials and challenges tested faith, refined judgment, and deepened understanding. He shared his belief that doctrine, while essential, must serve devotion, community, and the pursuit of God's will rather than personal pride or rivalry. The reconciliation at St. Gall became a model for neighboring abbeys, demonstrating the power of measured counsel, empathy, and collaborative reflection. Anselm returned to Cluny with a profound sense of fulfillment, having witnessed how careful mediation, grounded in scholarship and faith, could heal divisions and restore harmony. The journey also left Anselm with a personal insight. Leadership in the service of God was not merely about knowledge or piety, but about understanding, patience, and the courage to address conflict with integrity. He realized that faith was living, tested in fire, debate, and human imperfection, and that divine wisdom often revealed itself through the reconciliation of opposing perspectives. Back at Cluny, the abbey resumed its rhythms with renewed vigor. Manuscripts were copied, gardens tended, prayers lifted, and the cloisters resonated with the sound of devotion. Anselm, quietly contemplative, reflected on the lessons of St. Gall, the importance of humility in counsel, the necessity of compassion in leadership, and the enduring power of unity grounded in faith. That winter, as snow blanketed the fields and cloisters, Anselm walked among the brothers, observing their work and prayer. He understood that Cluny's strength lay not only in its walls or treasures, but in the hearts of those who served within them. Knowledge, courage, mercy, and devotion intertwined to create a community capable of facing trials, resolving disputes, and growing in faith. And in this understanding, Anselm found a deep, enduring peace. His spirit had been tested by fire, shaped by moral dilemmas, awakened by miracles, and refined through the reconciliation of discord. He had learned that true wisdom lay in the balance of devotion, knowledge, courage, and mercy, and that the life of a monk was a continual journey toward that balance, guided by faith, humility, and the ever-unfolding mystery of God. The winter sun hung low over the Abbey of Cluny, casting long, pale shadows across the frost-covered cloisters. Within the stone walls, the monks moved with quiet purpose, their breath forming clouds in the chilly air, their chants echoing through the vaulted halls. Brother Anselm, now accustomed to the rhythms of Cluny, felt a restless anticipation stir in his chest, as though the abbey itself whispered of an approaching trial. The announcement came abruptly. A nobleman of great rank and wealth was arriving, seeking an audience with Abbot Bernard. The messenger described him as Lord Guillaume de Rochefort, a powerful figure in the surrounding region. known both for his generosity and for a temper that could sway between charm and fury. His visit was unexpected, and whispers among the brothers speculated on the purpose of this sudden journey. Some feared political maneuvering. Others suspected a matter of justice or property. The day of the visitor's arrival was cold, with the sky a pale grey and the wind biting across the cloisters. The abbey's gates opened to admit a grand carriage drawn by 4 horses, their harnesses adorned with polished brass. Lord Guillaume stepped down, his presence immediately commanding attention. Cloaked in furs, with a heavy chain of gold across his chest, he moved with deliberate confidence. His gaze swept the courtyard, assessing the monks, the gates, and the stone fortifications. Anselm was assigned to receive him. He stepped forward with measured calm, bowing deeply. "Welcome to Cluny, my lord. May your journey be blessed, and your purpose meet the guidance of God." Guillaume's eyes flicked toward Anselm, sharp and calculating. "Brother," he said smoothly, "I have heard much of Cluny's sanctity, its wisdom, and its dedication to God's service. Yet I have also heard that even holy walls cannot shield wrongdoing. I come seeking both counsel and truth." Anselm inclined his head. "Then may God grant clarity in your presence, my lord. All who enter Cluny are subject to the rule, yet also protected in their dignity and conscience." Guillaume's gaze lingered, assessing Anselm not only as a monk, but as a man capable of judgment and moral fortitude. He led Anselm and a small delegation into the chapter house, where the other monks had gathered under Abbot Bernard's guidance. The fire in the hearth threw long shadows across the walls, highlighting the austere beauty of the room. Tall windows, carved stone pillars, and tapestries depicting the lives of saints. Once seated, Guillaume spoke with authority. "I come on behalf of my vassals and allies. A dispute has arisen regarding lands and titles formerly held by my late cousin. Some claim that the church, or one of its monasteries, has encroached upon these holdings. Others assert that I alone am rightful heir. I seek the wisdom of Cluny and the counsel of its brothers, that justice may be done." The request was complex. It involved secular law, ecclesiastical authority, and questions of moral legitimacy. Anselm recognized immediately that their response could define the Abbey's relationship with powerful lords in Burgundy for decades to come. Abbot Bernard gestured to Anselm. "Brother, you have witnessed trials of both spirit and conscience. Speak with clarity, but also with prudence. Let mercy and justice guide your counsel." Anselm's mind raced. He had faced fire, illness, political intrigue, and theological dispute. Yet this confrontation demanded something new: the balance of loyalty, moral courage, and discernment. He began carefully. "My lord, the rule of our abbey teaches us to uphold justice, to protect the innocent, and to act with charity toward all men. Our guidance is not of law alone, but of conscience and devotion. The resolution you seek must consider both what is right in the eyes of God and what preserves peace among men." Guillaume leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "And what of those who claim the abbey has taken what is rightly mine? Do you side with God or with temporal power?" Anselm took a deep breath. "We do not side with force or title alone. We side with truth, discerned through careful examination, prayer, and counsel. The abbey has always acted to preserve the common good, to protect those without voice, and to uphold both law and mercy. We will hear all parties, weigh evidence, and seek a resolution that honors justice and God's will." The weeks that followed were tense. Anselm oversaw discussions between Guillaume, his retainers, and representatives from the church and surrounding villages. Documents were examined, testimonies recorded, and theological principles invoked. The discussions were intricate, blending canon law, secular authority, and ethical deliberation. During this period, Anselm observed Guillaume closely. Beneath the veneer of noble authority, he saw ambition, pride, and vulnerability. The Lord's desire for control was balanced by a genuine interest in fairness, a complexity that mirrored the very human struggles Anselm had witnessed in his own trials. The encounter forced Anselm to reflect on his own understanding of loyalty, not merely to God or the Abbey, but to truth, conscience, and moral integrity. Late one night, alone in the scriptorium, Anselm wrote in his journal, "To act rightly, even in the presence of power, is the highest measure of faith. Temptation lies not only in wealth or influence, but in fear, in the desire to please, and in hesitation to confront what is just. God's guidance is subtle. One must listen with both heart and mind." The climax of the dispute came when conflicting claims threatened to escalate into violence. Anselm, guided by prayer and reflection, proposed a solution that balanced restitution with mercy. Portions of land were returned to the rightful claimants, while the abbey retained certain holdings necessary for its sustenance and spiritual mission. Guillaume, though initially reluctant, recognized the wisdom in this resolution, the careful preservation of both authority and harmony. At the conclusion of the negotiations, Guillaume addressed the monks. "I came seeking counsel, and I leave with both understanding and humility. Cluny has taught me that strength is tempered by mercy, and authority guided by conscience. I shall remember this lesson always." Anselm felt a quiet sense of fulfillment, tempered by the awareness of the delicate balance that remained in the world. Loyalty, he realized, was not blind obedience, but the courage to uphold justice, truth, and mercy, even when challenged by power or fear. The Abbey had preserved its principles, and in doing so, had demonstrated the enduring power of moral courage. The nobleman departed with the first light of dawn, the horses' hooves crunching in the frost, the Abbey gates closing behind him. Anselm watched from the cloister, reflecting on the trials of leadership, faith, and conscience. He understood that every encounter, every challenge, and every moral decision was a step in the journey of devotion. The Abbey's walls remained steadfast, but it was the hearts within them, guided by courage and wisdom, that truly defined Cluny's strength. In the silence that followed, Anselm knelt in the chapel, candles flickering, prayers lifted. The trials of fire, political intrigue, miracles, and noble demands had tested him. Yet through each challenge, he had learned that faith required discernment, loyalty demanded moral courage, and true devotion was measured not by comfort, but by steadfastness in the face of uncertainty. The Abbey of Cluny, enduring through centuries of trial and devotion, had once again proven that sanctity lay not merely in stone and ritual, but in the unwavering commitment of its monks to justice, mercy, and the guiding hand of God. Winter's grip tightened over Burgundy, a blanket of snow covering the rolling fields and forests surrounding the Abbey of Cluny. The cloisters were hushed, the usual sounds of labor and study muted by the icy stillness. Candlelight flickered through the scriptorium windows, casting long, wavering shadows across the stone floor. Brother Anselm walked among the monks, observing their diligence with quiet pride, yet a sense of unease pressed upon him like the cold that seeped through the walls. It began subtly, almost imperceptibly. Reports arrived from nearby villages of bandits disrupting the roads, taking provisions and threatening travelers. The winter storms had already made travel treacherous, and now the Abbey faced the added danger of lawlessness encroaching upon its borders. Anselm recognized immediately that the safety of Cluny was at stake, both in physical and spiritual terms. One morning, a messenger arrived at the gates, breathless and disheveled. "Monks of Cluny," he gasped. "A noble convoy has been attacked on the northern road. Merchants and pilgrims were taken, and some slain. The attackers, they claim no lord, no king, only their own will." Anselm gathered the brothers in the chapter house. The fire in the hearth roared, its warmth failing to ease the tension that filled the room. "This is not merely a threat to the roads," he said, voice steady, though his mind raced. "It is a trial of our vigilance, our courage, and our faith. We must act with prudence, protecting the innocent while preserving the principles of our rule. Abbot Bernard nodded, his expression grave. We will send aid to the villagers, provide refuge for travelers, and ensure that the abbey remains a sanctuary. Brother Anselm, you will lead this effort. You must balance mercy with security and faith with action. Anselm's preparations were meticulous. He organized patrols along the northern road, instructed the brothers in the safe relocation of supplies and relics, and coordinated with neighboring abbeys for assistance. Yet despite these measures, he felt a gnawing anxiety. The moral burden of responsibility weighed heavily upon him. Every decision could affect lives. Every hesitation could result in harm. The first encounter came at dusk. A group of travelers arrived at Cluny, their faces pale with fear, their garments torn, their eyes haunted. They recounted harrowing tales of bandits demanding coins, food, and livestock, attacking without mercy. Among them was a young scribe, clutching a bundle of manuscripts rescued from the marauders. Anselm tended to the travelers, offering comfort, warmth, and the solace of prayer. That night, as snow fell silently upon the cloisters, Anselm walked alone, reflecting upon the abbey's mission, the trials he had faced. Fire, pilgrim miracles, noble disputes had shaped him, but this threat was different. It was unpredictable, grounded in human cruelty, and impervious to scripture or debate. He prayed not only for guidance, but for courage, understanding that leadership demanded both wisdom and the fortitude to act decisively. In the following days, skirmishes occurred along the roads. Anselm and a small contingent of brothers, armed with staves and accompanied by local villagers, intercepted bandits attempting to raid isolated farms. They relied on strategy, knowledge of the terrain, and moral authority to persuade some assailants to desist, while restraining others without unnecessary bloodshed. Anselm's leadership was tested in every encounter. His judgment, patience, and ability to inspire courage under pressure became vital to the safety of the abbey and surrounding communities. The strain was immense. Nights were short, filled with prayer and planning, while days were consumed by vigilance, negotiation, and relief efforts. Anselm witnessed the suffering of the innocent, the desperation of those forced to defend themselves, and the moral ambiguity of confronting violence with the principles of faith. He struggled with the knowledge that even righteous action could lead to suffering, that mercy and justice often demanded impossible balance. Amid the chaos, small miracles occurred. Travelers found refuge at the abbey. Bandits, in rare moments of conscience, released their captives unharmed, and the monks' prayers seemed to provide clarity and courage in the darkest moments. Anselm interpreted these as signs of divine presence, subtle yet powerful, reinforcing his belief that faith guided not only prayer but action. One night, after a particularly harrowing confrontation, Anselm sat in the scriptorium, quill in hand, reflecting upon the events. He wrote, "Faith is tested not only in contemplation or study, but in action. The spirit must remain steadfast, even when the world is harsh, unjust, and unpredictable. Courage, mercy, and discernment are intertwined. To lead rightly is to serve both God and humanity, even in peril." The ordeal lasted several weeks, each day bringing new challenges. The abbey became a beacon of refuge and stability, its reputation spreading across Burgundy. Local lords and villagers came to recognize Cluny not only as a center of devotion and learning, but as a sanctuary capable of confronting chaos with wisdom, courage, and moral integrity. Through it all, Anselm's character deepened. He learned to temper fear with action, prudence with compassion, and faith with decisive judgment. He observed the resilience of the monks, their dedication to the rule, and the strength that arose from shared purpose and devotion. He realized that true spiritual leadership was forged in the crucible of trial, shaped by the choices made when consequences were immediate and profound. By the time spring began to melt the snows, the immediate threat had subsided. Roads were safer, villages were restored, and the abbey itself had remained intact, its sanctity preserved. Anselm walked the cloisters in the morning light, reflecting on the months of vigilance and hardship. The experience had tested him in every way, physically, mentally, morally, and spiritually, and he emerged stronger, wiser, and more deeply devoted. He understood that Cluny's strength lay not merely in stone walls or sacred relics, but in the courage, wisdom, and integrity of those who served within them. Trials would come again, as they always did, yet faith, moral courage, and devotion would continue to guide the abbey, its monks, and the communities they served. Anselm knelt that evening in the chapel, candles flickering, eyes closed in silent prayer. He offered thanks for guidance, for the resilience of his brothers, and for the lessons learned in the harshest of circumstances. The shadows over Cluny had tested their spirits, but they had endured, proving once more that devotion, courage, and faith could illuminate even the darkest winter days. Spring had arrived at last in Burgundy, soft sunlight warming the stone walls of Cluny Abbey and melting the remnants of winter snow into gentle streams that ran through the gardens. The air was fragrant with budding herbs and early flowers, and the sound of birdsong carried through the cloisters. Yet beneath this serene exterior, Anselm felt the weight of reflection settle upon him, as though the abbey itself invited him to consider the tapestry of years he had spent within its walls. The trials of fire, famine, bandits, noble disputes, theological debates, and the arrival of miraculous relics had shaped him, refined him, and transformed him from a young novice into a monk of profound wisdom and integrity. He had come to understand that life at Cluny was not merely about obedience to the rule or devotion in prayer. It was a continuous engagement with the human spirit, an exercise in patience, courage, discernment, and moral resilience. In the morning, Anselm walked through the scriptorium, observing brothers copying manuscripts with meticulous care. The flickering candlelight illuminated the delicate calligraphy, the sacred texts imbued with both divine inspiration and human devotion. Anselm paused before one young scribe, who struggled with the intricate Latin letters. Kneeling beside him, Anselm whispered words of guidance, not merely technical instruction, but lessons in perseverance, humility, and devotion. "Patience, brother," Anselm said. "The hand may falter, but the heart must remain steadfast. The work we do here is eternal in its impact, even if our names are forgotten." Beyond the scriptorium, the gardens flourished under the care of the monks. Anselm admired the orderly rows of herbs, vegetables, and flowers, reflecting upon the symbiotic relationship between labor, contemplation, and spiritual nourishment. Each seed planted, each path cleared, each task performed in devotion, he realized, was a prayer in action, a testament to the enduring power of faith expressed through daily life. The relic of the true cross, still housed in its wooden reliquary, continued to inspire wonder among the monks and visiting pilgrims. Anselm often found himself kneeling before it, reflecting on the lessons it had imparted: humility, faith, courage, and the understanding that divine presence manifests not only in miracles, but in the devotion, mercy, and integrity of those who serve God faithfully. Visitors arrived with increasing frequency, seeking counsel, blessing, and wisdom. Anselm received them with calm authority, guiding noblemen, travelers, and fellow monks with equal care. He observed that true leadership required both knowledge and empathy, a capacity to understand the fears, hopes, and moral struggles of those who sought guidance. His reputation as a mediator, scholar, and spiritual mentor grew, yet he remained humble, ever mindful that wisdom was a gift to be shared, not a tool for pride. One afternoon, Abbot Bernard summoned Anselm to the chapter house. The room, suffused with the soft light of afternoon, seemed to radiate serenity. Bernard regarded him with a warm yet serious expression. "Anselm," he began, "you have served Cluny with wisdom, courage, and devotion. You have faced fire, famine, marauders, theological disputes, and noble scrutiny. You have guided your brothers, aided travelers, and preserved the abbey's sanctity. But there comes a time when every monk must consider the legacy of his service, the mark left upon this world and upon the hearts of those who follow. Anselm listened intently, feeling the weight of the words. Bernard continued, "You have shaped the hearts of many, inspired faith and courage, and strengthened Cluny's foundation for generations to come. It is your example, more than any text or relic, that will endure." These words resonated deeply with Anselm. He reflected on the journey that had begun in youthful curiosity and obedience, evolving into years of trials, insight, and leadership. He thought of the fire that had threatened the abbey, the pilgrim and the relic, the noble disputes, the bandits, and the theological debates. Each challenge had been a crucible, forging character, deepening faith, and teaching lessons that could not be learned through study alone. In the evenings, Anselm walked the cloisters, observing the monks in prayer, study, and quiet conversation. He marveled at how the community had grown stronger, more compassionate, and more devoted through shared experience and mutual guidance. He realized that Cluny's true strength lay not in its stone walls, manuscripts, or treasures, but in the enduring spirit of its people, united by devotion, discipline, and love for God. He began to document his reflections, writing not merely as a record of events, but as a guide for future generations of monks. His words emphasized moral courage, humility, devotion, and the importance of balancing contemplation with action. He wrote of faith as a living force, tested through trials, shaped by human experience, and deepened through reflection, compassion, and service. Faith, he wrote, is not measured solely by prayer, study, or ritual, but by the courage to act rightly, the mercy to forgive, and the perseverance to uphold justice and truth, even when the path is perilous. As the sun set over the Burgundy hills, Anselm knelt before the relic of the true cross, feeling the weight of history, devotion, and the continuum of faith that had shaped Cluny. He understood that his life's work was not complete in grand deeds alone, but in the cultivation of hearts and minds devoted to God, in the preservation of community, and in the careful guidance of those entrusted to his care. In the years that followed, Anselm continued to serve the abbey with unwavering dedication. He mentored novices, advised abbots, mediated disputes, and nurtured the spiritual lives of monks and visitors alike. His wisdom became a beacon, inspiring generations to uphold the principles of Cluny: devotion, courage, integrity, and the relentless pursuit of spiritual understanding. When he finally approached the end of his earthly journey, Anselm reflected upon a life filled with trials, miracles, moral dilemmas, and profound learning. He understood that legacy was not measured by wealth, fame, or worldly power, but by the lives touched, the hearts strengthened, and the faith inspired. As he lay in his cell, surrounded by the quiet devotion of the abbey, he felt a profound peace. The lessons of fire, famine, bandits, noblemen, theological disputes, and miraculous relics coalesced into a singular truth. A life lived in service, guided by faith, courage, and compassion, resonates beyond the confines of time, shaping the world long after the body returns to dust. Brother Anselm passed quietly, leaving behind not only his writings, but a living legacy embedded in the hearts and minds of those he had guided. The Abbey of Cluny endured, its walls standing as a testament to devotion, its halls echoing with prayers, its gardens flourishing through seasons of trial and renewal. His life became a model for generations of monks, pilgrims, and scholars, a story whispered in the cloisters, recorded in manuscripts, and remembered in the meditative silence of those who walked the abbey's stone paths. Anselm's journey had illuminated the true essence of faith, that holiness resides not only in ritual and relics, but in courage, compassion, wisdom, and unwavering dedication to the divine purpose. Cluny Abbey, shaped by centuries of devotion and the lives of monks like Anselm, remained a sanctuary of learning, prayer, and moral courage. And in its enduring light, the lessons of a single monk, tested by fire, miracles, human conflict, and divine inspiration, continue to guide all who sought the path of faith, devotion, and wisdom.